Dance party, Sylvia.
I don't think they're seeing us. Oh. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, January 24th, and a meeting of the Salem-Keizer School Board is called to order. All directors are in attendance except for Director Hinojos Presi is excused. Okay. What am I doing here? Earlier, the board meeting was called to order at 5:15, with the board going directly into executive session under ORS 192.6602D to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. It is now 6:08 p.m., and we are reconvening our meeting with the public session, which is a work session. I'll now read our land acknowledgement. We are gathered today on the land of the Kalapuya, who are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz in. We respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Native American and Indigenous students and staff of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. We invite you to join us in honoring these ancestral grounds and celebrating the resilience and strength of all Native American and Indigenous peoples. Please join me now in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That brings us to item C, agenda modifications. I do not believe we have any agenda modifications this evening. And so next we will have our work session. The first part is integrated guidance, and I will turn the work session over to Superintendent Perry.
All right, good evening, everyone. We have been engaged in this needs assessment process since, I think, July, and you've heard multiple times about it in the boardroom. But we're coming tonight with a first draft of not the full budget, but at least the beginning portions of our integrated guidance. So what we're going to do is walk you through the process, tell you where we are, share with you what feedback we've gotten, and then in February, we will come back with the full application that you'll need to approve at a second board meeting in February. So with that, Dr. West is going to lead us through this entire portion of the work session. You have your slides in the packet, so you can follow along. And also then I took a stab at revising the results policy as it aligned to our outcomes. So it's a way to have that complete alignment through the system. But again, only a draft, and we would need to have some discussion and approve it formally within the boardroom. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. West, our Director of Strategic Initiatives.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry. Chair Carson Cottingham, directors, nice to see you this evening. We're going to go through a process orienting you to what we've done so far to get to this point in our planning, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions and make sure that you have all the information that you need before we come back in February and actually present the full plan, which will include an itemized budget. So to get us started, we're going to look at a graphic that has been developed by the Oregon Department of Education. This graphic orients us to the 6 different programs that we are integrating or aligning through this process. These programs are well known across the state at this point. High School Success is a good example of that. The Student Investment Account, we've been talking about these 2 different grants and programs in the boardroom for several years now. We also have Career and Technical Education, which is also known as Perkins. That's a federal grant. Everyday Matters, which is a grant that is focused on attendance across the state. This particular grant is actually woven into the funding of several other grants and largely run through our ESDs. And then early indicator and intervention systems, all wrapped up in this concept of continuous improvement planning, which we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this evening. You'll notice that within this graphic, there are several common elements among all of these different programs. For example, authentically engaging our communities, making sure that we hold equity at the center of our decision-making, going through a comprehensive needs assessment process as we determine what are the things that we should be funding for the benefit of our students. And all of these different programs point towards common goals.
I'm going to stop for just a sec. I think your screen might not match what's up there. You might be frozen. Are you running slides, Ethan?
I'm running slides on my screen. Is this the right slide?
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yep, we're
I
good.
thought we were stuck. We've had a problem all week freezing slides.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So common goals. So all of these programs point towards common goals like well-rounded education, advancing equity, engaging our community, and then making sure that we're strengthening our systems and our capacity as we're doing those things. So that's the intent of integrating all of these different programs. And it's a really good activity for us to engage in. I think you'll see that as we go through the rest of the presentation, it's prompted us to think deeply about some of the ways that we educate children in the district. The next slide is also from the Oregon Department of Education. What's important about this slide is to show that we are in the midst of an ongoing continuous improvement cycle that will continue for at least the next decade. The way this cycle is set up is that we draft a 4-year plan that we execute in 2-year cycles. So when we apply with the Oregon Department of Education, we will be submitting a 2-year budget. The expectation is that we are going through a continuous process of monitoring ourselves, evaluating, adjusting, and then in another 2 years, we'll submit a new budget, all towards the pursuit of 4-year goals and a 4-year plan. So how did we go about our process? Where we started was to identify the focal groups that we wanted to engage with. After we identified those focal groups, we needed to determine how we would go about that engagement. What was the protocol that we would follow? What were the questions that we were going to ask? Were we going to meet in person or virtually? We needed to answer all of those different questions before we could go any further. We facilitated those focal groups, and through that facilitation, we gathered tremendous amounts of feedback. Similar to the SIA task force, which some of you are probably familiar with from right before the pandemic, most of the information and data that we gathered was qualitative. We heard stories. We heard from our families what they valued, what they wanted for their students. We didn't collect a lot of quantitative data. In other words, we weren't collecting survey data or numbers or metrics that we could quantify through algorithms and mathematical formulas. Because the data we collected was qualitative, we actually engaged our ESD to support us in our analysis. We shared all of the information that we gathered with the ESD, and they went through a process where they analyzed that qualitative data to emerge themes for us from what we heard from our community, and they went through their own process internally to make sure what they shared back with us was reliable. You see there, they went through their inter-rater reliability process. For those of us that aren't researchers, what that means in layman terms is that the research team at the ESD checked their own evaluation of the themes that they were emerging to make sure that they were consistent, so that what we were using to determine our plan we could feel was valid and reliable for the engagement strategies that we engaged with. So what did we ask? When we went in front of our different focal groups in our communities, we put our strategic plan in front of them, the current strategic plan, which you're all familiar with. We also put our longitudinal data in front of our focal groups over the course of the last 5 years, with an asterisk in there for COVID, which we've talked about several times in the boardroom. Around those 2 different artifacts, we asked our focal groups to engage with the questions that you see in front of you right now. Not every focal group was asked every question. We did tailor the questions a little bit depending on the group that we were with. For example, when we met with our families who have students that qualify for migrant education services, we pared down these questions to the most salient ones, like what are the challenges, barriers, and obstacles that their students are facing as they engage in our education system. We wanted to bring the questions as close as possible to the experience of the community that we were engaging with. So who were the focal groups that participated? You can see on this next slide here, we have some general categories of focal groups, but within those general categories, we were very specific. So we actually engaged with students who are experiencing homelessness. Those are the students you see there from McKinney-Vento. We engaged directly with students who are members of the LGBTQ+ community and with adults and staff who are members of that community. We went out to the Early Learning Hub and our childcare providers to talk to them about their experiences in our system and learn from them how to help our partners in the community better prepare students as they enter into our system as kindergartners. We met with our faith leaders. We met with Salem for Refugees, and they helped us facilitate an excellent engagement session in multiple languages with families that are recently arrived here into this country as refugees. So we engage deeply with very specific populations to learn from them about their experience in our system. And here's what we learned through those engagements. These are the big themes that emerged. There's some things that our communities and our stakeholders told us we do really well. You can see the list there on the slide, but just to highlight a few of these things, we heard that we pay great attention to sense of belonging, and our families, our students, our community appreciate that. We have quality curricula in our schools. That's also appreciated. Our focus on inclusivity and cultural awareness is something that we do well. Quality leadership was highlighted, as well as our focus on using data to inform our decision-making. One of the things that emerged over and over again, which I want to highlight here, is we heard from our community and our students and our families how much they appreciated our focus on student voice. So that's certainly something that we're carrying with us into our plan as we go forward. We also learned that there's some things that we can improve, and that's the next list that you see here. I want to highlight for you that on this list that you see in front of you, in terms of improvement, several of these items have asterisks. Those items that have asterisks are actually on both lists, and that's important for us to pay attention to. One of the inferences that we can make from that is that the experience of our students across our system is not consistent. If we have some in our community telling us these are our strengths, but we're also hearing those same things are an opportunity, we know that we have some work to do in our system so that students have a common experience regardless of which environment that they're in. So we use this information, as I said, to develop our plan, and we'll start getting into that in just a minute, but we didn't stop with just these focal group stakeholder engagements. What we did with this information is to take it and develop some what we call theories of action around our learnings. So part of the process of engagement and listening deeply to our community is to learn what we can do better. And these are some of our learnings. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but want to highlight a couple. If we build common understanding of and the skill set for the why, what, and how of our work, then our school leaders and educators will have greater agency to make local decisions about meeting student needs. These theories of action are related directly to what we heard from our various stakeholder groups. I want to highlight here what might seem a little bit like a contradiction in what you're hearing tonight, but it's really not, and I want to explain why. So we know that we have some inconsistencies in our system because we are hearing that we have some things that are both strengths as well as opportunities for us. We also heard from our community that they want their school environment to match the population, that our school leaders know what is appropriate for the students in that environment, And it may not actually be the same as the school that's 5 miles away. They may need to do something a little bit different. So that may sound like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth right now, and we need to hold that space in our mind as we're going through this plan here, because we need to meet both needs. We need a common experience across our schools. We also need to be very mindful that student populations are not necessarily in need of the same support in every single school. So these theories of action help to inform our next level of work, which we're going to get into here. And our next level of work was to get in front of our educators, to actually engage deeply with the people who were doing the work at the school level, to share what our community said and to share our initial thinking around our plan. Our educators told us these are the things that they like about the direction that we're heading. They like that we're thinking about increased opportunities for connections, peer-to-peer and peer-to-adult. They like that we're thinking about how to engage our community in support of attendance. They like our focus on multiculturalism and multilingualism, on smooth transitions, and especially our focus on English learners. That's a very important population for us in the system. Our educators told us we could also do some things better in our thinking. Better distribution of resources with equity as the lens for that distribution. More parental involvement and more parental learning. I want to pause here for just a minute. This is super important for us. In our engagement sessions, we heard from our families, they want to support their students and they need our help to figure out how to do that. So one of our key learnings is that as we draft our plan, our integrated plan, we need to incorporate ways to engage with our families and our communities around how to best support their students. So you'll see that emerge in our plan. We heard that we can improve our thinking about class size, about the improvement of MTSS, and then making sure that we balance reactive efforts, because we know there are some things we can do better, with proactive efforts so that we don't have to react so much. We then also engaged our staff across the whole system around this question: what are some things that we can do to take off your plate that will create more space for our colleagues who are doing the work directly with students to focus on what we know works? And these are some themes that emerged through that engagement process. We need to have the most current curricula in front of our students and in the hands of our educators that's culturally relevant and evidence-based. We need professional learning that's focused on a few high-leverage instructional strategies. We need to be flexible with our students' scheduling and use of instructional time. Increase school and teacher agency. This is a theme that emerged over and over again, is bringing some of that autonomy back to the school level, back to the communities who know what they need best. Accountability across our whole system, more planning time, and smaller class sizes. So what are we going to do with all this information? We're going to do a few things. We're going to write a narrative. That is part of the plan. So the narrative are constructed response questions for our student advisors. You're familiar with this from the work in your classes. These are open-ended questions that the district needs to respond to that addresses, for example, how we attend to equity and how we engage our community and how we plan to continue to do that in the future. That's part of this whole process. The other parts of this process, which we'll dig into here in just a minute, include identifying outcomes that are tied to our data. These will be 4-year goals, 4-year outcomes, strategies that we will use to pursue those outcomes, and then activities that we will fund to try to achieve those strategies. So here's our first outcome. Outcome A, sense of belonging. We actually have 6 of these outcomes that we'll go through. I'm not going to read this slide in its entirety to you, but I want to orient you to it and explain why this is one of the outcomes that we've chosen. You'll see that in the bold, we have our actual outcome statement. In this particular outcome, our goal is fairly aggressive. we want to move our sense of belonging at the elementary level from a 62% favorability rating to a 90% favorability rating, and at the secondary level from a 33% favorability rating to a 70% favorability rating. And we'll do that by measuring ourselves with the Panorama Survey, and again, this is a 4-year goal. You see 2027 there as the year of attainment. This outcome statement was developed in collaboration with several different leaders around the district, using the feedback that we received through all of these different engagement processes, and then, as I said, vetted through additional engagement with educators and others around the district. We think this is the right direction to go in terms of sense of belonging. We started here because we know that students who feel safe, who feel welcome in their school environments, who have access to the resources that they need to have their basic needs met, they learn better. So if we can create that sense of belonging in our schools where students are cared for at the most basic level, they're more likely to access their education and be successful in that endeavor. To achieve this, we have identified 6 different strategies. So again, to orient you to how this works, we have outcomes, then strategies to achieve that outcome, and then what you'll see in February are the activities associated with all of these strategies. So these strategies encompass a broad spectrum of different efforts across the district, some of these new to us, some of these a continuation of things that we're already doing. For example, in a continuation of what we're already doing, we know that kids that are connected to school have a greater sense of belonging and feeling more welcome in their school environment. And by connected, I mean they're engaged in an activity, a sport, they're part of a club, they feel like they have a connection with an adult in the school. So we want to continue to support that strategy because we know it's effective in our school environments. One of the things that you'll see in here that's a little bit different and something we haven't really emphasized organizationally is that in A3, for example, we want our school-based equity teams to have a leading voice in what that sense of belonging effort looks like at the school level. So we want to elevate that team and their effort within those school environments. Again, going back to school agency, because we believe that school-based team knows what is best for that school environment. The last thing I'll highlight on this particular slide is you'll notice on every one of our outcome statements and associated strategies that there will be an accountability strategy associated with each. For this particular outcome, sense of belonging, A6 is our accountability strategy. The reason that we added an accountability strategy to every one of these outcomes is that we believe deeply that we have to monitor, evaluate, and adjust as we go through this process. We have to hold ourselves accountable to doing the things that we say that we're going to do and measure our progress towards these goals on a regular basis. Otherwise, all of this is for naught. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through these other outcomes here. Did you want to jump in, Superintendent Perry?
I just wondered if we wanted to pause for a minute and see if there's any questions on how we formatted, before we get through all the outcomes, just to take a pause in case you had any questions.
Just what you mentioned a few seconds ago about the accountability, could you go a bit more into that? Like, what does that look like? Is that like firing people, or is it, I mean, that's extreme, but yeah, I'm curious what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really appreciate that question. So here are a few examples that we've built into every one of our accountability strategies. One is, do we even have the system to monitor ourselves? So can we collect data around whatever the thing is? If not, we need to build it. If we already have that system, is it effective? Is it doing what we need it to do so that we're able to turn data into information and make good decisions? So that's one example. Another example you'll see in every one of our accountability strategies is that we know we need to make some tweaks in the evaluation system that exists for our leaders across the district, because if we're asking them to do these things, we should be able to provide our leaders feedback on how they're doing. So we know that we need to take a look at that current structure and see if it's actually working for us. Another example is that we've built into every one of these accountability strategies the mechanism to make sure that we're actually providing professional learning around the thing. What happens too often in education, more often than we care for, is that we say we're going to do a thing, we put it out in front of people, and we don't provide the learning and the ongoing feedback and the practice opportunities for people to actually get good at it. So we've built into our accountability strategy the mechanisms to make sure that we're doing that as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Just a little bit further on that. So there's metrics and standards that are developed for that when you're doing that accountability evaluation.
Correct.
Thank you, Chair. So, Dr. West, when we are doing this tracking, if halfway if we discover that we are not going in the right direction, or if the district policy is really not contributing to increased sense of belonging, would that lead to changes in district policy? Like, we realize we are not in the right direction or it's not working. Will there be a way for this measure to direct course correction?
Course correction is a good way of putting it. Yes, that is the plan. So again, going back to the second slide at the beginning of this presentation, we're in a 4-year planning cycle where every 2 years we resubmit our budget and our plan to the Oregon Department of Education. There is a balance there, Director Chandragiri. We need to allow enough time for the thing we're doing, the implementation, to actually play out so we can collect data and make sure people have the professional learning that they need in order to do the thing well. So we can't course correct too soon. But we also need to be open to adjusting if what we're doing is not working. And that's part of the data collection and the evaluation process.
Do you mind if I follow up, Jay? Please. So when you're developing this metrics, as Director Salazar asked, will the local community participate in developing the measures so that it makes sense? Because sometimes we can use a measurement, but for a particular community, what does the sense of belonging mean? How will it show? Will the local community in that school or in that region be participating in developing, or at least developing the metrics?
So let me answer that. First of all, the sense of belonging metric is related to Panorama. And the way we think about it for schools is for them to have some agency over that data and write plans for their schools. So the student population at McKay and the cultures they represent are different than the student population at South and the cultures. So at that school level is where there is that agency around how do you monitor the plan. And the second thing, what Director Salazar was referencing is the administrative evaluation, and those are guided by a set of standards that we're required to use, and that's what he was talking about, that piece of it.
Will the families also get to participate in developing, or at least trying to understand the data and seeing if it is relevant to the family, especially in some communities? You have to include the parents and families as well, not just the student.
Let me take a stab at your question and see if this is getting close to what I think you're asking. What we need to do, because it is the right thing to do, it's also part of this process as laid out by the Oregon Department of Education, is regularly engage our families. So as we are implementing the different strategies and activities that you'll see here shortly, we will be re-engaging with our community and saying, here's what we're doing, and here's what we know about the effectiveness of what we're doing, and continuing to collect feedback from our family about whether that's working or not. As we hear from our families and communities, as we just discussed a moment ago, we'll adjust if we learn that what we're doing is not working. Does that answer your question, Director Chandragiri?
That's a good start.
So one thing I would just want to say is these outcomes are based on the engagement sessions we did. So when we did the engagement session with, I know you went to a couple of them, we heard sense of belonging, and that was important. So the initial outcomes are based on stakeholder and family engagement. And we went across all groups. So that's one really important step in getting these on paper, was that engagement first. We didn't write any of these until we did the engagement.
The real thing I'm trying to understand is, will families sit with the district or the school staff as part of a team as you are doing it on an ongoing basis? That's a
Director
simple question.
Chandragiri, that's what they did. So
Oh,
the
that's what they
teams have
did?
sat with all of the groups and entities that Dr. West talked about in the beginning, all the focal groups, and asked these questions, and then developed from all of that information targets to achieve through these outcomes, and set a goal of the 62 to 90% for elementary and 33 to 70% for middle school. So no, I think the answer is no. There's not then another group that comes together to set different or new targets beyond these.
That's not my question.
Okay, what is your
Yeah,
question?
my question is, as you're monitoring this data on a regular basis, will the families also sit with the school staff or district staff on a regular basis for that particular school? That's all. Those data team will consist of families sitting with them, because the mix of students coming from a particular culture will be different, as we just pointed out, McKay versus, say, South. So will the local community sit on an ongoing basis to make sure those numbers mean anything, or is it heading in the right direction? That's all my question.
Okay. Yeah, so I understand now, thank you. So a couple of things that are built into these processes. We hope that the outcomes that we put in front of you will be tied into regular monitoring in the boardroom. They're very closely connected to KPIs we already have, and we may need to adjust our KPIs. So we will be bringing these data into the boardroom on a regular basis. In terms of the local school level, our school leaders, and I know this because I've spent time with them, Dr. Adosanata has spent time with them, our school leaders engage with their local families and regularly share the progress of students with families. And through that process, they hear from our families how our families and students are experiencing their time in schools and what they think the information means to them. That iterative process where we're regularly going out to our families and using what we're learning to refine and improve, I think that's what you're getting at, and that is built into our systems already.
Thank you very much. That's exactly what I was getting. So local communities have an agency in participating in a little authentic manner, and they can sit at that same table and participate.
Our school leaders are very good at engaging their local communities.
Thank you.
I had a question about when you're talking about the accountability, Dr. West, and you mentioned, providing professional learning opportunities and professional development. I just couldn't help but think about what you heard from staff, the slide a few prior, and when I hear, obviously we want professional learning and continuing education opportunities, but is the district thinking about what they can then take off of the plate of the educator or other staff if new professional learning opportunities are going to be placed on, so that it's not just piling on more for accountability kind of in the classroom?
So well said. Yes. So we know that we need to focus on a few things and do those things well. And that means that we may need to say no to some other things. And we've been making those adjustments regularly over the past couple of years. In fact, this very school year, we've made adjustments to our late start on Wednesday and the activities that under normal circumstances we might plan for that time on Wednesday morning, so that our educators had a little more time to implement, to plan, to do some of the things that we'd already spent some time learning through these professional learning engagements. So we're very mindful of that very tricky balance. And it is a balance because we need to learn and develop in order to do things better. But then we need time to implement, and we need time to gather feedback and put our heads together collectively to develop that efficacy around supporting students. So yes.
Thank you.
I think last question, maybe we can move on. On the same list of what we heard from staff, and we've kind of alluded to it, to the school and teacher agency, could you share a little bit more of like the why and the how behind that? Like where does that come from? And then how do we currently envision this being put into practice? And I understand that is probably still kind of in brainstorming.
Yeah, let me just clarify the question to make sure I understand. Are you wondering where the desire for greater agency is coming from?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic question. So if we think back just a couple of years to the start of the pandemic, one of the first things that we did as a district, and every district across the state and across the nation had to do this, is we centralized all decision making. We brought all of that into the central office because we had to. We had to get really tight about how to educate in a distance environment and what that was going to look like. We had to get really tight about what it looked like to bring students back into a physical space and maintain health and safety protocols. We had to centralize things in a way that we haven't had to do before, and that has been our experience for the last couple years in the education world. What we're hearing from our educators, and we think that they're right to bring this forward, is that we don't need that level of control anymore. It was appropriate for the time that we were in. We can shift some of that control back to the school level, where we have school leaders and we have educators that are working directly with students and have a really good read on what the student sitting in that 3rd grade classroom, that 6th grade language arts classroom, that 9th grade algebra classroom needs. There's a balance, just like everything we've talked about. Some things still need to be controlled at the district level, but to the degree that we can return that autonomy and agency back to the school level, we think we should. Does that answer your question?
Let me give a couple real-world examples too.
That's really helpful background.
Yeah, so real-world example, teaming, collective efficacy of teaming of teachers. Smart brains sitting around a table gives us 1.51 effect size, greater than the year's growth of kids when teachers team. So the teaming is the important part, but do we have to have a very prescripted data team protocol? Probably not. How do you allow teachers time to team without the prescriptiveness? The other thing we did this is a reading example, and I think, Suzanne, hopefully I'm remembering it correctly, but one of in reading, we were really tight about, we know that phonics-based instruction is really critical, and we have a very tight phonics-based instruction that goes with our reading adoption. Well, we moved that phonics, that ECRI teaching into 3rd grade because kids had missed so much from the pandemic. Well, what some of our teachers didn't realize is use it as needed because they felt like we were too tight. They're like, you have to use this, but my kids don't. So we're trying to really empower educators to have research-based interventions, strong curriculum, good professional development around reading instruction, and then use it what they know based on kids. Mm-hmm. So sometimes that tightness, they keep waiting for permission to have, so that's a couple examples.
No, that's helpful.
Isaac.
Yeah, I have a bit of a quick question here. I'm just really curious as to kind of what this slideshow or plan looked like in 2018. And then I don't know if there's like an email that can be sent to see what this looked like, because that was the previous strategic integrated planning year, right?
This is a first.
Oh.
So prior to what you're seeing in front of you right now, we did have strategic plans, which you see displayed up there on the wall, and there are some documents that sit behind these, which we're happy to share with you. The documents that sit behind these are similar to what we're talking about in that we've identified some activities that we think if we do will help us actually develop data-driven systems, which is one of the goals that you see on our strategic plan. the plans that we have are not to this depth, and they also don't necessarily tie directly to outcomes on different state and internal measures like our KPIs. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Just one other thing I wanted to say, sorry, Director Chandagiri, that I didn't understand your question earlier. I was thinking of, then since we talked about that I forget, do we have access to the school-specific panorama data through our dashboard? So that as the board is monitoring over time, we could drill down and see. I mean, I'm assuming, even if we don't, the district does, and so that might help to adjust. You know, if we see that one grade school is not anywhere close to 90% by the 2027, a different strategy could be used or something like that.
Yeah,
Correct,
That's a
we
very
do.
good point, Chair, because ultimately, local communities, parents and all, if they can at least guide us.
Right, there could
And,
be some
you know,
key there.
there are some cultures, you have to involve parents. In some cultures, it's more weighted towards individual autonomy for children. Some are very socio-centric, like, the family has to start with. I can't explain it any better than that. So parents feel that they can also sit down and understand and participate. That way, together they can help a sense of belonging and safety, and that will also improve other metrics.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Specific to your question, as a reminder, Panorama is a survey that's administered twice per year. So it's not sensitive enough to monitor on a monthly basis. It won't give us new information that regularly. We don't have a dashboard set up for that right now. We do return those data on a monthly basis in the monthly report that you see in the board packet. So that is one way that you can monitor us. And as said just a little bit ago, part of what we need to do with every one of these outcomes is go through an internal process to ask ourselves, how are we monitoring, and is that monitoring working for us? And if the answer to that is no, then we need to figure out a different way to monitor. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. It's very helpful. I think it just would be interesting as we get on in the years of the plan to potentially look at each of our zones and drill down at the school level to see, are there huge differences in improvement in sense of belonging at one middle school versus another, or one grade school versus another? But we'll get there later.
Great question. Thank you.
Kind of following with that, and I know I've received the answer before, but what's the level of detail that, is it just per schools, or can teachers, for example, see their aggregate response in their classrooms for sense of belonging? I think I know, but I just want to make sure.
Yes, teachers can see an aggregate response at the classroom level, and at the school level, of course, counselors have access to some additional information. And Panorama does return some tools based on individual results at the school level that can be utilized to support student populations within the school. At a district level, we can see all of that information, plus, as you're alluding to, I think, see trends over time within a given school or within populations within a given school. So we do monitor that regularly, and we only administer the survey twice a year. So it's super important for us to keep track of, but it's not sensitive enough for us to adjust to every month.
Dr. West, sorry, Chair. Does this also, is there a plan to eventually include the panorama for the staff engagement?
We do that.
So is that going to be under outcome A for that particular school, children and staff engagement?
That's a good question. We haven't included the staff outcomes in outcome A, but that is something that we can consider as we go through and refine these outcomes and strategies. Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay. We've held you up long enough, I think, right?
Not held up. These are super important
Yeah.
questions. We need to talk through this, so thank you. As I said, getting back to the rest of our outcomes, we have 5 more to go through. I won't read these slides to you because you're all capable readers, but I do want to orient you to why we chose the outcomes that we did. and then answer any questions that you have about the specific strategies. So you'll notice outcome B is around attendance. If students are not engaging in their education, if they are not at school or attending online, if they're in one of our online programs, it's really difficult for them to learn. So we need students to come to school. That's why it's our second outcome that we're focused on. And the strategies that you see there, we believe will help us actually improve our attendance rate. One that I want to highlight is B2. B2 has us engaging with our community organizations, with partners within Salem, within Keizer, to support attendance in our schools. I'll give you an example of what this might look like. We have some students that don't come to school, but they might be at a local rec center. Do we have individuals in that recreation center going up to those students, developing relationships, helping them get back into their school environments and re-engaging? We can work with our community partners so that they can help us in that process. In our local churches and synagogues, do we have the leaders that are working directly with young people, talking to them about the importance of schools? We can engage with our community around that and ask them to be partners with us in this work so that we have students that are regularly attending so that they're learning the things that will help them graduate and move on to whatever aspirations they have in life. Following attendance, we want...
I was just going to ask the acronym TAP.
Oh, yes, thank you. I appreciate that. So this, the TAP Advocate is a tribal attendance program that's actually sponsored by the Oregon Department of Education. This is new. It's a pilot program. We're right now the largest district working directly with Oregon Department of Education on this program. And the reason we specifically highlighted that is our students who identify as Native American or Alaskan Native have one of the lowest attendance rates in our district. So we do believe that if we focus on this student group and leverage the position that you see here that's funded by ODE directly, that we can improve that outcome. One of the things that you'll see throughout all of these outcomes and strategies is that we know through many decades of research that if we can elevate outcomes for certain focal groups, we actually elevate the whole system through that effort, both through what we're learning and through the application of the strategy across the whole system. So that's one reason why you'll see specific focal groups identified in these outcomes and strategies.
Chair, can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
Among the strategies, is there any possibility of contracting with a community-based organization to work directly with the parents, so that we can increase the attendance and either like a parent-to-parent academy or the contracted agency becomes an entity that will help increase the attendance, because across different socio-demographic groups, attendance is a challenge when we look at the data, including the Micronesian population. There has been a decrease in attendance, especially after the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've done quite a bit of that over the last few years, and it's that strategy of working directly with CBOs has proven highly effective. To the degree that we're able to continue to do that, I think we will, where it makes sense. And we have long established relationships with many community organizations that have been doing that before the pandemic and have restarted those programs as early as this year. A good example is the Salem-Keizer Coalition for Equality. Leyendo Avanzamos is a program that they bring into many of our elementary schools and have been doing that for years, and it's a direct parent education program, highly effective. We will continue to support that to the degree possible.
One thing to note, too, is that a number of our strategies around community-based organizations are in ESSER, and we also have to remember this pot of money is not new money. We're just planning around it differently. So we have to balance the need for in-school supports with, not that we can't, but community-based organizations when that ESSER funding is going away as well.
So will that be under B2? Will it be a contracted relationship or just talking to the community partners, will there be dedicated amount of money that will be set aside in budget for B2?
We're still working on the budget for all of these strategies, so we don't have that quite determined yet.
Thank you.
Supervisor Brennan?
I just have a definition question for attendance. Are we just talking about like skipping, or are we also talking about like sick days?
Yeah, that's a great question. Primarily by students who are not excused from attendance, so to use your expression, skipping school. We need to improve that rate. Right now in our system, we have rates that we believe are too high for what we call chronic absenteeism. That's what we're hoping to address through these strategies. Does that answer your question?
Go ahead, Director Salazar.
Going forward, I think what you're doing is excellent, but I also, as we reach out to these different, it doesn't necessarily have to be contracted, but I have found, and I've worked with some in regards to churches of all denominations are willing to counsel and work with students. And what I've been able to do in the past is provide a liaisons to those schools and administrators and help students get into whatever. In one particular situation where a student told the advisor that he was not in the correct math class, I went and I talked to the principal and I said, is there some way we could adjust that student's class? He moved it down. And that student came to me about 2 weeks later. He says, were you involved in this? I said, yes, I did. I was. And he thanked me for that. And he says, I'm doing so much better with that. So I think as often as we can coordinate and collaborate with those organizations, it's going to be a real benefit.
Yeah, thank you for that. And your anecdote highlights the importance of personal relationships in the success of students in our system. So that's certainly something that we want to continue to elevate and pursue. Outcome C is specific to English language proficiency. We have a significant number of students in our system that are learning English. We know through our internal data that students who are learning English at the high school level struggle to graduate. So we want to push ourselves to do a better job to meet the needs of students who are English learners, certainly at the high school level, but also across all levels in our system. I do want to orient you for just a minute to what this outcome means the way it's written. You'll see that we're switching from percentages like you saw in outcome A around sense of belonging to levels related to a measure that is actually administered by the state. In this case, it's ELPA, and that's the English Language Proficiency Assessment. Those results are returned to us on the Accountability Detail Report, which can be found on the Oregon Department of Education website for our district and for every school, and that's true for every school and every district in the state. The Accountability Detail Report is the information that sits behind the report cards, which are released by the state on an annual basis. So when we say that we want to improve K-5 English language proficiency on track from level 3 to level 4, what we're saying is that among those students who are English learners who are taking the ELPA in the elementary level, on that accountability detail report, we want to see the whole district elevated from a level 3 to a level 4. For context, a level 3 on the accountability detail report is state average. So as you're looking at this outcome here, our elementary students generally perform at state average on the English language proficiency assessment. At the middle level, they're a level below, level 2, state average. So we'd like to see that jump up to level 3. At the high school level, the performance is generally at a level 1. That's generally the lowest 10% in the state. There are lots of reasons for why you see this distribution, and we can get into that in another session if you'd like to. I don't think we really have time for that tonight. But regardless of the reasons that contribute to the different levels that you see here, we know that our English learners struggle to be successful in our system if they advance too far in their academic career. And by that, I mean if they get into high school and they're still English learners. So we want to pay attention to this particular metric and challenge ourselves to do a better job here. Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that a little bit. And when I was with the Oregon Department of Education, we would look at those scores. And what you're doing is exactly right. You know, that accountability from the primary to the middle to the high school. No, there has to be that consistency. And that we look at that and determine if that is, and as you mentioned, you will get into this later, so I don't want to bring it out too much, but to see what's happening and what adjustments need to be made. I think that's an excellent accountability system.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Want to highlight here C1. You'll see that two-way immersion, dual language instruction is our first strategy for this particular outcome. We've brought information about our expansion of dual language instruction into the boardroom before. We know through decades of research and through our own internal data monitoring that this is one of the highest leverage strategies that we can employ to help students acquire English proficiency. And those students who do acquire English proficiency in our system before they enter high school graduate at rates greater than their white monolingual English-only peers. So when we do this well, students really benefit. So it's an area that we want to more or less double down on and continue to improve in. Yes?
Could you just explain what that is a little bit?
The two-way immersion, dual language? Yeah, great question. So two-way immersion means that you have two or more student populations within the same classroom that are learning a target language. In our elementary schools, for example, that means in a fourth grade classroom, 50% of the students are English speakers only, or they could speak another language, and then 50% are Spanish. We do that in two-way immersion so that we have the benefit of students being able to learn from each other the rich cultures of both student groups and the rich language heritage of both student groups. So we're actually developing multilingualism in several different student populations simultaneously. Right now at our secondary level, because we don't have the same number of students that are in need of Spanish instruction like we do at the elementary level, we have several one-way models. One way is another model for students to acquire English proficiency over time, but it doesn't necessarily have a 50-50 distribution in the classroom. So we know over time we'll get there, we'll have two-way immersion across our whole system, but it takes a little while for that to matriculate up through our entire 65 school system. Does that answer your question?
I'm just going to do a quick time check. I was thinking another 10-ish or so minutes. Does that work? Okay.
That works great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to outcome D, elementary literacy. We've talked about this a little bit this evening and also quite a bit over the last few years in the boardroom. We chose this because we know that once students leave third grade, they transition from learning to read to reading to learn, and if they don't have that core skill solid, their academic pursuits become really difficult. So we want this to be something that we continue to improve in terms of our third grade students reading at grade level. You'll notice here a couple of metrics. We want to elevate student reading outcomes for all students by 20 percentage points. And then we want to go even further for students who are Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic Latinx. Again, if we focus on those particular student groups in our reading instruction, we believe that we'll elevate the whole system. Also want to point out to you that as we continue to monitor third grade reading, we do educate a significant portion of our students in this district in Spanish in grade 3. Most of their instruction is still in Spanish. This state test is all English. So this will always feel a little lagging to us. We're working really hard to identify a measure that will allow us to provide some comparable data for how Spanish literacy is developing alongside English literacy, so that we can return some really meaningful information to the board and to the community.
One of the things in your board goals was around that, how do you monitor dual language implementation? So you can see that right there in the strategy. And Olga's been working with her team diligently on finding the right literacy assessment for that biliteracy. So she feels good about that direction, and it's a little check mark in your goal.
I put a little star because that made me just all excited to
I know,
have that.
they're all like, boop, boop.
Excellent. All right, we're really close. We have 2 more outcomes.
Director Chandigarhi has a
Dr. West, thank you very much. I really appreciate this focus on dual language and literacy. Is there any strategy for some kind of high-dose tutoring after school, just so that our children can catch up after the pandemic and all the other things that we went through? Is there a place somewhere that there can be tutoring or after-school tutoring year-long?
So I'll let you answer, but I think this is the answer right now, that after-school tutoring is not part of this strategy. What we really want to focus on is really strong Tier 1 instruction. Our primary instruction has to be good. We have to have research-based interventions for our kids within the school day to be sure that we can move that 3rd grade reading metric. And I also this is a, kind of fact check thing. Have you, Dr. West, anywhere in your travels in the district heard any resistance to the dual language strategy at all?
Nope.
Okay.
Not at any
'Cause-
level, any grade level, any school environment.
Okay. I just want to be sure that's on the record, and hasn't been. Have you heard it ever? Last year?
Not in this community ever.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving through the last 2. So, last 3. So outcome D, we're done with that. We are at the last 2. Okay, outcome E, 9th grade on track. So we've talked about this in the boardroom as well. To reorient you to what we mean by this is that we know that if our students who start 9th grade don't earn enough credits that first year to be on track to graduate, their entire high school career becomes really, really hard. So we want to do a good job of ensuring that students who enter the 9th grade leave their first term and certainly leave that first year of high school with all of the credits that they need to be on track to graduate. So the strategies that you see here are intended to move us towards that. You'll see again that we highlight our Hispanic Latinx community, and we want their outcomes, their 9th grade on track outcomes, to be equal to or greater than our district average. Again, if we focus on this particular focal group and we employ strategies for this focal group as well as across our whole system that elevate the outcomes for our Hispanic and Latinx students, we know we'll be elevating our whole system. And then in terms of outcome F, this is the ultimate goal. This is graduation. So this is where we want every student to end up at the end of their career in Salem-Keizer. And we want to improve the graduation rate for our English learners from a level 1 to a level 3 by spring 2027. Again, as measured by the District Accountability Detail Report. Going back to what I said just a few minutes ago, it's our English learners that struggle most to graduate at the high school level. So we believe that if we employ strategies and activities that support our learners of English as they go through our system, our high school system, we will in fact elevate the whole system. So that's why we chose this as an outcome. What questions may we?
I had a question on outcome E, a little bit, a why question, I guess, on the focus on Hispanic and Latinx students. Is that because of just percentage of population, or is that just, do they fall on the lower end of that on track to graduate?
Yes, to both.
To both, okay. Thank you.
Treasurer Hyan?
So how do we assure the parents of students that do not fall into that group that if their children are struggling, that we're not leaving them behind or forgetting about them when we have this focus?
Yeah, that's a good question. So by focusing on specific student focal groups, that doesn't mean we're not also employing similar or in some cases different strategies for the rest of our students. What we know with these outcomes is that we need to pay particular attention to the success of these students in our system while we're also working hard with all of our other students, because our own internal data over time have showed us that these are the student groups that struggle most for us. So focusing our attention in some ways on specific focal groups does not mean that we're diverting our attention from other students.
So if I can make a recommendation, if somehow that was part of the written record, that's communicated, because a parent's going to read that maybe and not understand the context, and they're going to think, well, what about my student? We kind of include that information as they read it, that they know that their child will also receive what they need.
Great suggestion. Thank you.
Dr. Avila?
Thank you, Director West. That coincides with all the research and knowledge that I know and understand, and it's also applicable to higher ed. My question, it may not be even here or around here, but something in consideration of the graduation and then somehow related to math. We know in higher education, the number one reason students fail out or stop out is because of their inability to pass math. And so many efforts are being created and implemented, co-requisite math classes where students are taking non-college level math within a math class. Is there anything, doesn't have to be within this or further development, that we can assure that our students are at the math standards, where we're also helping that pathway or that bridge, so that they are in college-ready math classes once they go to the next level?
Yes, in fact, it's part of our 9th grade on track. The very first strategy that we have for our 9th grade on track outcome is the improvement of math pedagogy at all grade levels. And to break down the word pedagogy, what that means is that we know that there are specific instructional practices that better support the instruction of math than others. So we want to revisit what those are and help our colleagues that are doing the work directly with students develop those skills and practice those skills so that we improve math instruction. By doing that, we will also improve math learning.
Thank you.
Just in this presentation, I've kind of started to understand that one of the backbones of this whole initiative is the key performance indicators, because that's what we're evaluating ourselves on. And so just thinking, especially to the outcome A and the sense of belonging, how reliant it is on the Panorama survey. And I don't know how new it is, but it's the past couple of years we've introduced the Panorama survey, and it's twice a year. And just kind of thinking about maybe directing our student advisory groups and focusing a little bit on how we can communicate effectively with students the importance of the survey, because it is really important. It's kind of telling the district, here's what we need to do better, and here's what we're doing well. So just as we go forward, I think it'd be really important and handy to have the Panorama survey be something that students kind of acknowledge, something like forecasting, where we do it every year, we have to do it, something you have to take seriously because it's important, and just thinking about that going forward. And I think that's something that we should pass down to our advisory groups, especially with all the student engagement we're doing, and then how teachers can communicate that.
That's a great suggestion.
Great insight. Thank you.
Oh, Director Chandagiri.
So when we're going through all this, is there any strategy for continuing honors classes, AP classes, or AVID, and for those who are interested in going for STEM education, etc.? Where will that strategy fall under this?
Yeah, great question. We don't specifically call out AVID within the strategies that you see here. AVID is well established in all of our secondary environments. It's not going anywhere right now, or at any point in the future that we foresee. So we don't feel that it's necessary to necessarily call that out explicitly in these strategies.
How about STEM education and science and math for those who want to pursue healthcare track or computer science and engineering? Where will that be under this?
Yeah, you'll see that embedded within outcome F, F3. CTE is explicitly called out. And just as a reminder, the Perkins Grant and High School Success have explicit criteria to focus on CTE and STEM education, so that will certainly be part of what shows up in our activities. So just to quickly wrap this up, we plan to come back in February. We'll come twice. A first read on February 14th and then a second read on February 28th. What will be different between now and then is when we come back on February 10th, we'll have the full activity list with associated costs for you to review. We'll also have the narrative that we referenced for you to review. The strategies and the outcomes, we may adjust a little bit based on our ongoing feedback that we're collecting and what we heard tonight in the boardroom. But otherwise, those will largely be what you've seen tonight.
Thank you, Dr. West.
Can I just make a comment before we, go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as we wrap this topic up, that the amount of work that has gone into this, the engagement was really impressive. I know a large number of people from the district put a lot of time and thought and energy, and the ones that I attended, and I think others on the board attended, were just, they were really well put together, really authentic conversation, and I think it has really helped inform our pathway forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
In your packet is a draft, brand new results policy. I just decided to start over because it felt like it was pretty outdated. But I put the old one in. And what I've done is I've documented some of the values here, the key performance indicators, and then on the second page of it, it shows the outcome measures. And so a results policy like this fully aligns the system with the work. There was some draft language around Spanish language assessment, some of that, but that's all within your board goals. You can see it in our activities already. So I tried just to strip it back to the most important outcomes. Draft only, take a look, give some feedback. I can bring it back into the boardroom next month.
Okay, well, we'll end this topic then, and let's do a 10-minute break. So we'll come back at 7:28. Okay, welcome back. It is now 7:34. And we are going to move on to our topic B, Safe and Welcoming Schools Design Committee, Safety Systems, and School Resource Officers. And we are going to start with Director Hyen on the School Resource Officers issue. And so I will turn it over to her at this time.
Thank you. So I wanted to lay out the history, since there's only 2 board members here. There's other people, but 2 board members here that lived through what went on with the SROs. To give everybody a little bit of background, some of the things from a report I'll be reading, it's more for the public than you because you got the report and I'm assuming you read it. So anyway, anything I may say that may not be totally complimentary, as I told Superintendent Perry, is just because it's part of what I remember. Don't take it personal. Don't take it personally. So really what I want out of this is for our conversation to continue on SROs. And I think I can lead you to understand why. Did you know that at one time the district actually wanted to have its own police force? I'll bet that might be a surprise to a few of you. I was a no vote, even though I'm very much pro-police, because I think it's important to have outside accountability and not have everything within the district. And so that's why I couldn't support it at the time. And I just kind of wonder what would have happened to those employees had we implemented our SRO policy. Anyway, I'm going to take you back to 2020, March, a time we remember well, especially in the district with COVID and lockdowns and everything that came with that. Then, with the tragic loss of life of George Floyd, came a tide of anti-police sentiment and calls for removal of SROs from schools around the whole country, not just here in Salem-Keizer. There seemed to be one particular group of students who wanted the SROs removed more than others. They had been coming in for a while, well before the 2020 events. Their testimony in the boardroom always left me with more questions than answers. I really wanted to understand what was going on and to understand their personal experiences. At the time, I was board chair, and I told the district I was interested in talking to them so I could understand. And all I got from the district was pushback and no access, that they would handle it. And as board chair, this really didn't help me to understand the student's perspective. As board chair, we're still in June here, I polled all board members, and all board members wanted to keep the SROs in our schools in one form or another. All of them. At this time, the board and the public were in limbo, not really sure what was going to happen or when a decision was going to be made. In August 12th, 2020, the Student Task Force on SROs was created by the district. I believe I got the date right based on a report. And although the board and public were unaware, the SRO contracts had been allowed to expire the month before. I'm going to read a few excerpts from the resulting report that the students gave for members of the public that may want to read this in full. You can find it in our school board archives, January 12th, 2020 agenda. So here's some of the pieces from the report. As a part of our task force, we desired to have as much representation as possible. A couple of representatives from the Los Latinos Unidos SEMTE, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, were invited to partake in the task force week 1. It was very informative and helpful to all of us to hear the Luz student stories and their perspectives on the situation, as well as hear their take on the school to prison pipeline. However, while the loose students were an asset to our team, their organization and the negative actions they took part in resulted in their removal. There is an article from the Salem Reporter written by Rachel Alexander covering this occurrence and the details related to the result of loose students being departed from the task force. One thing we wanted to emphasize is the main reason we had to remove the loose students from our task force is that they broke our confidentiality agreements, that we had to remove our agreements that were set in place during the week one of the process. And by the way, this all was set up by students, and they were in charge of everything here. While these confidentiality agreements were not a contract for students to sign, we all understood that there were individuals out there who would have gone to extremes if they didn't agree with our ideologies. Safety was very important to all of us, and to prevent harm from possible threats, we had to keep confidentiality within our task force. Although the loose students broke our agreements, the other students of the task force came together to put together those agreements into a contract and set rules in place so that all of us could feel safe and secure in what we were doing. The students also, they did lots of different things. You can read all the details. I don't need to read it to you. One other thing I wanted to point out is the students also used the Salem-Keizer School District SRO 2020 synthesis report, which had community opinions. I'm not sure if I've seen that. Of course, it's been a couple of years, so maybe we saw it and I don't remember. Another thing from the report, with that being said, and that was they wanted to hold off on SROs while nobody was in school. It didn't make sense to them to have anybody there while we were remote learning. With that being said, our recommendation is to not remove SROs from the Salem-Keizer School District and instead make changes to the system that need to be fixed rather than getting rid of it as a whole. Going into specifics, we have separated our recommendation into 4 areas that our task force wants to work towards creating change in. Those include accountability, relationship, training, mentorship, and student engagement. Some of our community voices that wanted our SROs to stay said, "This is exactly the time we need police in our public schools. When I hear there are children afraid of the police, keeping the police officers in the schools allows the opportunity to change how those students feel about the police. My children learn to appreciate the SROs while learning stranger danger and say no to drugs. From these powerful role models, pulling police officers out of the school sends a message that the police are bad. We do not want our children to run away from police when they need help. We want them to run to police." And here's from an employee. "Our school resource officers are an integral part of our school district and schools. I work in a middle school, and the presence of the SRO is a positive influence on our students and staff. They are here in emergency situations, help when needed as an extra adult to monitor the halls, a friendly face and sounding board to the kids who are exposed to a negative home environment or are having problems at school with other students. They help the faculty and staff in classes as special speakers talking about how and why they became police officers, in health classes explaining the effects of drug and alcohol abuse. They are a resource for legal ramifications of students' behavior. They are subject matter experts in an area none of the staff can fill. They have resources the school district cannot provide. The school security specialists are also an integral in schools, but they are not SROs and they do not have the same training as police officers. The immediate access of the SRO makes students and staff feel safe, important, validated, and they have a friend that they can trust in a time of need." There's more, but I won't read all of it. And then there was one, I couldn't find this email on such short notice, but I remember hearing from a mom who said that her son probably would have committed suicide if it hadn't been for an SRO there dealing and helping her child with being bullied in school. So in March of 2021, the district announced that the SRO contracts had been canceled. Of course, actually, they just had not been renewed. back in July. So my question is, do we really care about student voices? Do we really listen to them? And what happened to the recommendations of the Student Task Force, which was to keep the SROs? We care about the feelings of our students, and I don't understand why this was dropped. And I think about all the hours these students spent on this task force. So I am asking that we listen to our students and take the steps laid out in their report. A positive relationship between the police and our students will benefit them into an adulthood and benefit our community. We tell our children to run to the police or call the police if there's trouble, but if we teach them to mistrust them, that makes no sense. The police are human beings. They're mothers, fathers, police brothers, sons, and daughters. None are perfect, but neither are we. Final comment from the students' report. A key thing that we keep bringing emphasis to is that we need SROs and students to form positive relationships. And the first step of that is allowing students to see an SRO as just another human being, someone who is at our schools to support students and help students succeed. So the student group listed areas that needed to be delved into and worked on. I don't know, have we done that? I don't think I've heard about it, at least none as a student group. And with that, Director Chandagiri, do you have anything you want to add? Thank you.
Chair, can I? Well, thank you very much. I wrote a brief summary. I just want to read parts of it which I shared with all our board directors. See, as we emerge from this perfect storm and pick up pieces and move forward, we have to acknowledge that terrible things have happened. And there are cascading consequences of policy decisions ahead of us. Some of them are very sad that we have to face this. For example, threats to our school safety. And on 2 occasions, for example, we had to call the FBI to help us. It breaks my heart when one of our 16-year-old students, instead of being in school, was shooting and was unfortunately died at the hand of police because he shot at the police. And the safety challenges faced by our staff at Waldo, challenges with behavior and risk the way I see it, has outstripped our capacities, and gaps in our threat assessment. Staff injury, we have heard from the vice president of the teachers union saying that staff are also afraid of reporting. I'm not here to say second guess, or not here to say we should have done this. History, we all know what happened. Just like Director Hines said, the times were such, it was a perfect storm, and everybody was caught up in that storm. That's how I see. As a board, we cautioned not to make some big decisions in the middle of a perfect storm of many, many factors, which really harmed everybody, affected everybody. And the times were such, people were suspicious of each other, people were angry, people were scared, and all kinds of emotion was going. So I went back and looked at the civil rights data collection report, all the way from 2008 or so. I went and looked at the Oregon Department of Education. And at that time I saw, there were, of course, we have some SROs. And it was not entirely clear to me where the children were getting arrested, whether they're getting arrested in the community or in the school. And at that point in time, it was all showing 0-0 to all the school-related law enforcement referrals and arrest. It didn't make sense to me because the children were telling us that they were getting into trouble with the law. And I kept asking, is it happening inside the school or is it happening in the community? Because that's a really important ratio to consider. Is it school-related arrest or is it a community-related arrest? Sometimes the problem could be happening in the community, but they come to school. Some of them are by federal law mandatory arrests. There is no ifs and buts about it. It's nothing to do with school policy. But the narrative and the emotions were such, there was no room for any discussion. So at that point in time, we got a report from the Marion County DA's office. And I'm just going to read this thing. Less than 1/2 of students in Marion County are arrested by SROs. less than 1/2 of 1%. Removing SRO does not remove police from school. Law enforcement and DHS remain obligated to coordinate and co-investigate child abuse cases, most of which occur at school, aren't sent so that the kids are not sent home to the perpetrator. And as predicted, instead of SROs, the patrol officers will have to respond, some of whom are brand new, responsible for emergency response elsewhere, unable to adequately investigate such cases. And so in this process, I, Superintendent Perry, and rest of our board spent hundreds of hours behind the scene, going through the data, trying to understand what is going on. We had multiple meetings, I must say. Anybody wants, they can request. I got hundreds of documents. So we spent lots of hours trying to figure out where is discipline, what is happening, at what point in time the law enforcement have to get involved. Is it the problem at a discipline end, or is it at the problem at the SRO end? Because there are at least 5 different steps that are involved from the time a child is identified to have a difficulty till the point of time the juvenile justice system adjudication happens. There is also a Salem threat assessment document. It's a very good book that I read almost like 2 or 3 times. So there's a step 1 and a step 2. There's ways in which the systems are put in place. And there was a newspaper article for a good, the Statesman Journal wrote a very good article, I must say, for a change, they wrote a very detailed article which really says that SRO should never have been involved in discipline process. So then I started asking, so what is going on here? Because every time the whole narrative was, obviously the national tragedy got brought into our community, and the entire focus was on those 13 officers when there was no data to support it. And then we go back and look at the data. Of course, there is disproportionality of discipline, expulsion, suspension, and that problem has not been solved at all. It's still happening. There is 2:1 ratio of children from Hispanic or Latino community, expulsion, suspensions, and of course there is a 55% increase in the risk of disciplinary problem. Most of it is fighting and aggression and violence. So the question I really, then we went and asked, I got a report from the Keizer police, because I wanted to have more than one way to know what is going on. Because of civil rights data collection, that's when we discovered we were not even measuring the law enforcement referrals. So that leaves it open. So we tried to go back and take a look at our data and see what is being reported, what is not being reported. Then we got an independent report from the Keizer police. Even that shows that most of the report talks about the positive role the SRO plays. So the child learns to trust the officer. Because these children have to eventually become an adult. If there is a domestic violence or a crime happening in their home, they have to learn to have trusting relationship. They cannot take law into their own hands. So this is how we were. At that point in time, there was also an atmosphere of entire fear in our community. People were scared to say what they had in mind. Of course, there were some group of public comments where they are also coming from the position of fear, saying that we are scared of the police, we don't want them. But we were not able to articulate to the community the real problem has been in the way our discipline policies are being implemented. So we went along with that narrative to relieve the pressure in that moment. The decision was made to remove the SRO or not to renew the contract. In that moment, it did serve a purpose to diffuse the situation. Unfortunately, on a long run, it was not a sustainable solution in my mind. Because the children have to learn to understand the consequences of their actions, or learning to know what is within the law, what is not okay, how to have a trusting relationship with our agencies or institutions. Unfortunately, in that area, we started failing. So during the distant learning, it was thought that we didn't want SRO. But on the other hand, that was the time the reporting of child abuse went down, but that didn't mean the children were safe, because only a sworn officer has the ability to span through multiple systems and trying to find out if there is an online predator trying to harm our child or not. Because no psychiatrist or social worker has the ability to go through that. And as we know, in 2 cases, we had to call the FBI to help us. So we did discussed these things behind the scene with our district leadership and with multiple meetings saying children are going to come back after the pandemic. They're going to be much more traumatized. Is this the prudent decision to make? After a lot of discussion, it was, there were certain groups, as Director Hines suggested, and NAACP headed by Dr. Richardson. He also was, of the opinion that children were scared of SROs and this is not the thing. But it was impossible for us to articulate this point in the community. And we really felt this was not the right way to go, not to make such precipitous decision with disastrous consequences that we are unfortunately facing at this point in time, because these officers, when we end up calling, don't have a relationship with our children, and they have to come in from the community as predicted by the DA of our county. So this was the background in which we felt. Then the question was, is it an operational decision or is it a board decision? So then we got clarity on that. It was an operational decision by the superintendent to make this decision. But ultimately, board is responsible for the safety. So by an executive limitation, we said, okay, this is an operational decision, but every month you show us an outcome to say how our children are going to be safe. Of course, month by month, that's how we started sharing this data in public.
Director
Then, of course,
Spencer-Gary?
I'm just going to finish this, please.
Thank you.
Then it led to a situation, the data stopped. And in the last 2-3 months, the data is being presented, but we never had a discussion on the data. We saw the data, the numbers were going up, 55% increase in disciplinary problems, and yet nothing has changed. We haven't achieved anything. Number two, in the last 2-3 months, the way the data is presented, it has become even more convoluted. Before it was month to
Dr.
month, so people
Shindigiri?
could see a trend.
Dr. Chandragiri, I think we need to wrap this piece up, and it's a perfect segue because I believe that we're going to hear about how we will have more discussion about that data in.
So let me just wrap it up in 30
Thank you.
seconds, if it may be.
Yes, because I would like to comment.
Yes, please, let me finish in 30 seconds. So what I would really like to say is, when we start moving forward, what do we do? Putting pieces together cannot include set of false choices, this or that were offered in the midst of a perfect storm. There is really an urgent need for course correction. Let's get an independently verified forensic audit of all that happened. Let's really try an authentic, confidential survey of all families of our students, all families, for this. And then we can have data and this audit to guide us what kind of policy changes we need to change. Because we have heard clearly the policy hasn't changed. So the teachers' union
Director
shared with us.
Chandragiri, I'm going to cut you off. We're going to
Please.
now move to the next part. The policies, we're deep in the policies. So we really want to hear about the policy work that we've asked occur in the district through our Safe and Welcoming Schools Design Committee. And so it's my pleasure to turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent, one of them, Dr. Udos Nataf.
Good evening, Chair Carson Cottingham, Directors of the Board, and Superintendent Perry. Give me just a second to get my setup,
Yeah,
and then we'll get going.
no worries.
It's pretty good to multitask at the end.
I kind of feel like a DJ,
And you have to.
so bear with me. I have my notes right here on my left side. It doesn't help that I'm left-handed. So what I'd like to do right now is just give you an update on where we are with one of the established board goals around safe and welcoming schools and standing up a safe and welcoming schools committee. If you look at this graphic, this might look a little familiar. If you recall, back in 2020, after we went through the process of going through the student task force, having deep conversations with the community about school safety, we hired a group from NYU to do a deeper dive on what school safety looked like. And in that moment in time, one of the biggest takeaways was our commitment to making sure that students were safe, and also understanding the complexities of what school safety was. Yes, we need to lock into physical safety and understand what that is and take measures to ensure that students are safe. But importantly, we also need to understand what is psychological safety in school and where does sense of belonging fall into this. And so that was the work that was done in 2020. And though we haven't lost sight of the importance of safety, one of the things that was important to us was to make sure that we're continuing to engage staff, engage community, students, and families on this area of safety. So one of our goals this year was to stand up a Safe and Welcoming Schools Committee as a continuation of that work that we've done over the last 2.5 years. So what is the role of the committee? If you direct your attention down to the second bullet right there, the committee will learn, monitor, and understand important aspects of school safety that include physical and psychological safety and sense of belonging. The Safe and Welcoming Schools Committee will advise the board on various aspects of school safety, And importantly, I think that what this committee does is it acts as an additional structure of many other structures that we already have in place to ensure that we have strong systems around school safety and also safe and welcoming schools, but also that we have transparency in the public about some of our systems, on our ongoing monitoring of current issues, attention to best practices and research, so that we are staying current with what school safety looks like in our schools. If you look in the very bottom bullet too, as we look to stand up this committee, which we plan to do soon, we want to make sure that we have really good representation from the community, that we have diverse ideologies and diverse representation on that committee. So prior to getting this committee going, what we did is we stood up a Safe and Welcoming Schools Design Committee. And this operated very much like what the steering committee looks like for the curriculum adoption work that we did and that was presented on earlier in the year, where we have specialists or people that are very familiar with the work that are that do the curating and try to develop a structure for what our overall committee will look like. So when you see the acronym SWSDC, that's the design committee work, and when you remove the D, that's just the committee work. And so we'll go back and forth from those acronyms in this report. But the task of this committee was really to design the structure, the format, and really look closely at what the outcome should be before we went as a group out to recruit a fully formed committee. And so on this design committee, we have knowledgeable leaders who work in the schools. And for example, we have our director of SRMS represented, our director of MTSS, we have our director of the Office of Student Equity Access Advancement, we have behavior specialists, assistant principals, and all of these staff are very familiar with our safety systems, with our student social emotional health systems, and also especially those who are in the building, have a good pulse on what's going on with students and issues of safety concerning students and staff. So as we began our work in late October, we picked up or we borrowed a page out of the NYU handbook. The NYU group was the group that did the engagement sessions in the spring. And here's the 3 questions that they asked. What does a school feel like when students have a sense of belonging? What do community staff and students want to know about safe and welcoming schools? And what kind of outcomes do we want for students, staff, family, and community? And so we engaged in a series of exercises looking at these things. And here's the big things that we came up with, the themes that will help guide our work when we stand up a committee. Students and staff are really interested in elevating the voice of students, family, and staff. When we think of student safety, we think about care and connection, a sense of belonging, physical and psychological safety systems and supports, Something that also came up was frequency of racism and the presence of racism and discrimination in schools, and how do we attend to that, how we track that, how do we monitor it, and how do we respond to it. And student behaviors. So how do we attend to that too, and put systems in place or monitor systems related to student behavior. So as in the next couple, so the Safe and Welcoming Schools Design Committee, we're meeting weekly now. When we first started, we were meeting every other week. We do understand that time's of the essence, so we're expediting our work to ensure that we meet that board goal of standing up a committee by mid-spring is what we're targeting, and you can see the timeline right here. So we're hoping to fulfill and complete the work of the design committee so that we have a structure and something that we can report to the board. We'll initiate an assembly of the Safe and Welcoming Schools Committee, which will include students, staff, community members, et cetera, board members. And in March, we plan to give an update on where we are with the Safe and Welcoming Schools work, and that's when the full-on committee should launch. And in June, we hope to have an update, provide the board an update on where we are with the systems that we've decided to monitor as a committee, what our learnings are, and other activity from the Safe and Welcoming School Committee. And here's a quote that I want to leave with you, because we get sometimes so caught up in the details of this stuff, but I think it's really important to center this work on students' experiences. And every child deserves an education that guarantees the safety to learn in the comfort of their own skin. And that's what we're trying to do with this committee, is reinforce this sense of belonging for all students. Any questions, or I'll pause so the superintendent can make remarks as well.
Yeah, let's take a minute for questions here, and then I'll have us switch into some of our safety systems, just so we can reorient around that work.
Yes, thank you for that, because what I was looking at is, and to update myself on what's happened, I looked at the two reports. First of all, what the students task force was, and I found it to be excellent. And I was disappointed in that the LOC group, didn't want to keep the confidentiality, because I think that's a key element in groups such as that when they're dealing with something. And but they had some good ideas, but the remainder of the task force still had those representations of all groups, and I thought that was very commendable of them. Secondly, the report by NYU had a lot of common themes that what the students presented, and I thought that was just what we had talked about. And also, as we look and we talk about belonging, we talk about the elements that make kids feel comfortable in schools. We're involved in that and committed to that. What we presently have is we have two issues. First of all, something that has to be done directly because of teachers feeling threatened, and those things have to be dealt with at the building level. When I was a principal at one point, actually I was a dean of students, and there was this confusion with gangs and other things that was developing in Woodburn, and the teachers were having a session, and they says, well, we had a new vice principal, and he says, well, what we need is one big super counselor. I said, no. I says, everybody in this building is a counselor. I says, you're going to have access to students that I don't have. You're going to have access to students that somebody else doesn't have. Even if it's a custodian or some of the cooks are going to have relationships with those students that can be developed. And they will talk to them before they'll talk to somebody else, a teacher or a professional. And then they can be brought to myself or someone else that we can make that process. Everybody agreed. And then we agreed to determine that we would follow that policy. Not everybody was on board with it, but they knew that it would affect and correct the things that had to happen. Now, with what you've presented as far as a timeline for that, yes, that has to be done. And the direction and the way that we're going is commendable, because it will take time in order for we to have the sustainability that it has to occur for those students to be successful, and for the root of those problems to be covered. It has to be done that. It can't be something quick. And resource officers are good, but they're not all the same. Just like everything else, that is done. And I've, the referral of the McNary, yeah, there was an individual there who had grown up in the community, was a star athlete in the community, and both had support of the parents as well as the students knew who he was. And those things are what we would like to see, and that's what the student group said when they put out their 4 categories that they would want to see, you know, a development. That's going to be training. And do we have the resources to have that develop? And when? And it would take a process, a timely process to do that. And so, again, I want to commend you on the process that you are doing, and that the judgments, as far as the SROs go, I would like to see them back in, but I would like to also see with the standards that the committee puts together, as well as some of the things that the student voices had put together. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. One thing that I want to say to that about it taking time is this process has taken a little bit longer than we thought, but part of that is because of the deep learning and deep conversations that we've had. And so while we're confident we're going to get this thing up and moving by spring, it's been a pleasure to be working with this group and really understand their perspectives of safety. And I think in the long term, it will help us get it right.
Other questions? Director Chandagiri.
Thank you, Dr. Udosunata. I really appreciate, I mean, this is not easy job by any means. I mean, this is going to be a long-term project. So I really commend you for finally getting to this, because, you know, there is no perfect solution. None of us have. We have to have some grace in understanding that we all kind of have to learn as we go. And this was, it's like changing oil while you're driving your car. You have to take short-term measures.
Have you done that before?
Well, I haven't. Nobody has. And it is like we have to take steps to make sure safety is assured while we are planning the long-term things. So, because even a teacher, you know, it's not just the child who is going through a difficult time. It's 100% of other children and other teachers are vicariously getting traumatized. The learning becomes impossible. So I really appreciate that you're taking this head on, and I hope the community gets to see in a little bit more real time what steps are being taken, because there is a disconnect between what the community's perception of what is being done. They see what comes out in the newspaper. And we all know what comes out in the newspaper is often not pretty. So what they don't see is the real-time steps that needs to be taken is being taken. It's not just like binary solution, one or the other. It is probably, as Director Salazar said, we need to have systems in place, as the student task force has suggested, and make sure that there is solid accountability, the community participation. You know, even a local community can hire the person to make sure, so they have full faith in the person who is working there. So I hope we put some systems in place rather than one or the other solution moving forward. That's what I would like to see. At the end of the day, 7 of us have to be fully responsible for the safety of every child, every teacher, every staff. And that is where, as a board, we do carry that fiduciary duty, and we have to be responsible. We report to the community, and parents ask, why is my child assaulted, or why is this child getting into trafficking, or whatever happens. We need to go back and be able to tell them, you know, you send your kid to our school, they'll be safe. So let's work towards that. That's what I would like to see. You know, water under the bridge, it's gone, but moving forward, we shouldn't waste this crisis.
Thank you.
Second Vice Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Udosunata.
Hey, well done.
Okay. I see on the timeline the initiative assembly of the committee in February, March. Can you give us a sense of when that would start? But I was also curious if that will be like application process or kind of select like folks identified by the design committee. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Well, we haven't got to the actual application, what it will look like. Right now, we're fleshing out with the design and with the and we're walking our way backwards. And so we spent a lot of time trying to determine what are the outcomes that we're looking for with this group. And in doing that, the next question is, okay, who needs to be there? And then how do we ensure that we have opportunities for diverse representation on there, and that we have the right voices at the table. And so we meet on Wednesdays, and so we have a meeting tomorrow on Wednesday, and we're going to really start fleshing that out. And so I think that according to this timeline, though, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, this thing will really start coming together. For the last month and a half, it was a lot of learning and then piecing together what these themes are, how to put these themes into context, and then what kind of monitoring systems we could anticipate standing up, just so that we can help be a steward to the new group that comes in as we assemble the entire group.
Director Avila?
Thank you.
Oh, you need the
Microphone.
Thank you. Dr. Dostaneta, got it on. We're on par.
Y'all
today.
get A's.
You don't get kudos.
I didn't.
I want to say something to Director Shandagiri too, and to our community. There is a perception of safety which is being discussed within this very important work. And the perception of safety, especially for proponents of, on the topic that's being raised of SROs, they suggest that the presence of SROs make schools safer somehow for students, educators, staff, and make parents feel safe. However, research also states that our students, especially our Black and Brown, Indigenous students with disabilities, don't also feel safe and are more are choosing to miss school, skip school because they don't feel safe at that same environment, because that environment is no longer safe for them. So in this research, there's been studies that have found little or no connection between the presence of SROs in the perception of school safety. And my recommendation is, or question is, how much discussion is the actual investment in counseling, mental health support, nurses, so that we are actually addressing the issues that create these disobedient, misconduct, teenage, adolescent behaviors that are creating disruptions in their learning, if not to them personally, to their fellow peer students.
Thanks for those comments, Director Avila. We have, in our current group, we have different sources of learning. One of them is through research and reports on school safety, both nationally and locally, and we intend to tap into those resources as well, so that we can do learning on what the impacts are for students on everything from the presence of law enforcement to what is the mental health trends for students nationally. We would even talk about anxiety in school, suicide, being seen, being heard, being acknowledged. There's a lot of research on that, and so we intend to go into that. And then also we want to draw on local resources as well. So we have reports from the state on student safety. We have our panorama data. We have our NYU report, and we even have the local coalition of safe schools and the Safe Schools and Communities Coalition, which publishes an annual report on student sense of well-being and safety as well. And so we intend to tap into all of those resources to help guide our work.
Great, thank you. Now, just air of caution, in my research on this, is found that, reported in multiple articles, it was found that a lot of states, counties, cities, districts do not report as transparent when they're dealing with student arrests and school to prison pipelines.
So we'll need to be critical thinkers and consumers as we look at those reports.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you.
Thank you for all the work that you've done. I think my one request would be, well, I'll probably have more than one request. Let's be real. Because we've talked so much as a board about all of the data that we asked the district to provide in our packets, I think when we were developing our strategic plan, we were hoping that this body would be one of the spaces that can be looking at how all of, and you're probably already on this path, but how all those data elements are telling us something. And we, as a board, once a month at our larger business meetings, don't have time to do the deep dive into all of that data and have it tell us something that's actionable. And so my hope is that this committee in particular would find some sort of method for raising up the core issues that data is telling us something, with all of the other things that you're incorporating into the committee, and report out monthly. Maybe it's something like a one-page report to the board, so we know what are the core issues that are popping up, what's the committee recommending, and what can the board do to help, because it is such a core responsibility for the board to ensure the safety of our kiddos in public schools and the educators and staff working there. And so I think we all are anxious to know how we can help and what's happening on the ground level that is something that we can take action on.
And just if I can add to that, because I was looking at this and, yes, seeing that there will be reports to the board, but then also thinking about how this kind of falls within operations and, the scope of superintendent and the district. So I guess that piece, right, of how is it operationalized? Like, yes, the reports, but then like that other piece of it. So maybe that's something that we can just kind of clear up more, because I'm looking at this of, yes, they'll report to us, but is that where the accountability lies, or where I see it, within the district? But
yeah, I've been sort of thinking about it, since this is a work session, like a think tank, right? This group that you're putting together has all the brains and experience to be able to look at all of that and tell us what it means, bringing all the factors in through an equity lens so that the board's informed, instead of us pulling one data element out and worrying about that or raising it and that not being helpful to the whole system.
So just in response to that, and I also want to acknowledge Advisor Brennan has had their hand raised as well, so I see you. You all are rehashing some of the conversations that we've had over the last few meetings, and that's where it gets complicated, because part of the role of this group is to be researchers and curators. Part is for people to come with their lived experiences and share what they see, either in their practice as students or as staff. And part of it is to be almost operating in an administrative type role, right? And that's where we have to establish a governance, and that's what's kind of slowed down the process, because we have to determine, is this going to be a standing committee? What's going to be the commitment? Will it be a two-year commitment? What will the system of governance be around this group? So those are, and how are we what's our responsibility to the board and to the public too in this work? And so those are things that we really need to get a jump start on, and then really flesh out as a committee as we delve into the work. But I think we can accommodate some of the requests that you discussed.
Go ahead.
So I have two questions. The first being, for this committee, would there be a possibility for student or students serving on this committee? And then the other portion of my question is for what the committee tackles, for parts of it that the committee feels like they have currently tackled, because obviously we have to tackle something and then see if that worked and whatnot. Is there possibility for growth on what the committee later tackles?
So the first answer, Advisor Brennan, is yes, there will be space for students on this committee. And the second part is we have to really start with the outcomes and then determine how do we get to those outcomes. Is it through a system of, do we develop, I'll use a very generic, but maybe a real goal that we might have. We might, as a committee, decide that we want to develop a system for tracking instances of hate and discrimination in schools. So what would be the structures that we put in place to monitor that? And then how would we establish what the effectiveness was of that monitoring tool? And then how is that impacting student experience? And how is that having an overall effect on student safety, right? So that's one way to look at it. Another way is to look at an action. I'm kind of hearing maybe an action item. And so is this going to be an action committee versus an advisory committee? An advisory committee might advise the board or the district on how to move forward, whereas an action committee might be a little bit more active, if you will, in carrying out tasks that promote school safety. So those are still things that we don't have the answers to, but we will explore in earnest when we get back together.
Thank you.
Okay.
Director Shanaguri.
Thank you, Chair. So, if I understand right, there was a question, this is all operational thing. I think from the way I understand is the board's responsibility is safety. You'll have to come up with some way to demonstrate that this is how we are measuring safety. And then by an executive limitation, we have delegated it to the superintendent so that you make that happen by changing policies, practices, training, resources, etc. And the question is, then you keep reporting back to us with some metrics, some numbers, or some on a regular basis so that we have some kind of informed oversight into the direction we are going. So if these policies are not making the changes that we are intending to, or if this committee begins to see or the teachers are seeing that it's not heading in the right direction, what steps will be taken to say, look, this is not working, we need to make a change? It's like you write a prescription for an antibiotic, patient is getting worse, then you have to change the medication, right? So how do you change policies or practices halfway when you realize you're not heading in the right direction? And what steps will there be? Who have oversight over that at an operational level?
Well, we don't know the answer to that because this board hasn't, or this committee hasn't been formed yet. But if they were an advisory board, then they would give advisory to, if they're an advisory committee, then they would give advice to the board, which then would work with the superintendent to develop policy. Now, you asked a question about if the things aren't working, then what's the recourse?
What is the steps that, who will be responsible? What steps will be taken to change course or change the policy or change the training or practice? Because we are assuming that all this will result in decrease behavioral problems or discipline, exclusionary discipline. Nobody will get into trouble. So if it is not heading in the right direction, who will keep an oversight at a district level? And so what way can board say we are not heading in the right direction?
I think this is a perfect segue into the next part of my presentation, which is on safety systems. What you'll see is that this is an additional structure, like I mentioned earlier. So what there is an ongoing feedback loop from our internal structures, and from the community, and of course from the board. And so with those inputs is how I imagine this group would adjust what their goals are, what their outcomes are.
Just to reset back to our board goals, which we wanted to, I think we set out to have that drive our work. So just for the record, like the public, our goal 3 is to equitably improve the conditions and systems that lead to safe and welcoming schools for all students and staff. And our strategy 3.1 is to create a safe and welcoming schools work group. So we call it a work group in our strategic plan. The responsibility is for the district and a community work group. Work product is monthly meetings with school safety metrics and reporting, and the reporting is a monthly written update to the board. So that's what we set out to do. We can always adjust, but that's still what my ask is.
So, Chair, if I may ask for a point of clarification, is this work group different from the work group that was presented by Dr. Udasinat?
No. No.
They're the same work group, and we're operating with this board goal in mind as we move forward.
All right. So there is a mechanism to report back every month so we can all keep track of we are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, that's what we had asked, and how it gets set up and operationalized. I don't think we're gonna be like super strict, but I think as long as the intent is well known and we're receiving that monthly, that's what I think we had
So
agreed to.
hopefully by June, we'll have this.
Well, I
put in
think
place.
starting in March, we'll be hearing monthly on
Right.
the
Thank you very
formation
much.
and- Yeah. If I'm understanding. Yeah? Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Vic.
Okay, so let's go on to our third part of this agenda topic. Is that,
Yeah, let me start,
Dr.
and
Edustin?
then we'll run through our safety systems. Let me
Okay.
tell you why this is on the agenda. So, Director Chandragiri, you mentioned very clearly that there's been lots of reports in the paper, and I think one of those came from you, and you said it multiple times tonight, the complete disregard of our safety systems and our threat assessment system. So, your opinion, and I know you're running for office, so I understand the need to create energy around a campaign, but sorry, I'm bothered by this on behalf of our staff, because the people that you recognized last month, the people that stood back there, and the people that you walked up to and said to Courtney McCarthy, wow, the threat assessment, you have a model system, those things, in making those comments, the people that show up every day for the safety of our kids were totally dehumanized. And I got a chance to sit with our police chief this last week and talk about prevention. And isn't it exciting? We have a police chief talking about prevention. And we were talking about our system and that we were stronger than ever as a preventative system. Was a totally different narrative from the people who understand safety. Now, we can always do better, but I just want to say, and I called Courtney after that, because the amount that Courtney takes and the amount that Chris and his team take every day, they're showing up in such incredible ways. They're cultural navigators out in our community. They're talking about gang violence like nobody else in the community is talking about. They're setting up volunteer programs in our schools so kids can see people that look like them, that are models. And each thing they do, we have people that want to dehumanize their work, and it's just not very cool. So sorry if I'm emotional about it, but I just want you to know the impact on the people who show up every day to have safety in our schools. So when I was talking to Courtney about our threat assessment system, the thing she reminded me of is that our threat assessment never starts with the police. Never. It starts with us, because we are the keepers of the preventative system. We know the kids, we know the challenges, we know the threats they're posing. Now, we engage law enforcement. And our police chief would say, of the city of Salem, would say, is stronger than ever. So on that, I would like you to do a fast run-through for our safety systems so we can all be reminded of the good work we do and be a little reassured when people make stuff up that isn't true about us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I want to talk with you all about our safety systems. And there's two facets of safety that have been reoccurring themes tonight. The first one is physical safety, and the other one is psychological safety. And I want to talk about our systems of support that are present in our schools. Just to make sure that we have a good, common understanding of what physical safety is and psychological safety is, I just have some stuff written down here that we can use as a point of reference. So physical safety refers to the protection of all stakeholders, including families, caregivers, students, school staff, and community from violence, theft, and exposure to weapons and threats to establish a secure learning environment. For students to learn, they need to feel safe. And psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for respectfully speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns or mistakes, and that school is a safe place for interpersonal risk-taking and growth. And if I might add, psychological safety is also feeling a sense of belonging in schools and feeling like you have a trusted adult and trusted peers that you can go to and that you're okay for showing up for who you are in our schools. So I'm going to come back to the safety pyramid right here, and I'm going to stay on the psychological right now. And I want to talk about our systems of supports using our MTSS frameworks and our tiered jargon, right? So you've heard us reference tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 many times. Tier 1 are the types of systems that we have in place that impact everybody. And then tier 2 are the systems that, and tier 3 are the systems that we have in place that impact a smaller percentage of our students, with the smallest percentage being tier 3, which are intensive intervention supports. And that's maybe 5 or 10% of your population. So examples, and as I tee off the discussion about, or our presentation about psychological safety, I'm going to talk about a lot of the systems that we have in place, and we have a lot of research based practices in place, but the single most important part of our psychological safety is the people that we have in schools. When we have the right trusted adults in schools, when we have adults and students who are able to represent other people, that creates a space where students feel safe and where they're able to learn, right? And so people are the real decision makers, and what our goal is we need to build the capacity and invest in those people so that they can show up for our kids who really need them every day. So here's some of the examples of what our tier 1 systems would be. Bullying prevention is something that all students receive education on, and something that we give close attention to. Community mental health and partnerships, that's a tier 1 system that we have for psychological safety. Our advisory courses that teach on character and also help students to do self-work so that they understand their own social emotional health and are able to do self-assessments and reach out to trusted adults and staff if they have questions, concerns, or issues, right? That's an example of our tier 1s. And our tier 2s are for students that have an issue and need more intensive supports. And that's where they access our school counselors, our social workers, our school psychologists, our crisis response team. Those start getting into our tier 2 and tier 3. And for context, we have 121 school counselors in our buildings, right? So that's roughly 2 counselors for every school. We know we have more in the high schools and not quite as much in our elementaries that have less students, but all of our students have access to a counselor, which we're proud of. We also now have 24 social workers, and we fielded 900 requests for supports, which show that our systems are working and that people are taking advantage of them and that we're caring for students. And when we do that, they can engage their education. Now I want to come back to safety and support system around the physical safety. So again, using the same format with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If anyone, or most people in here have been in a building recently, when you walk into a building these days, you need to either be buzzed in and then you enter a vestibule, and then you get asked, who are you here for, or who are you picking up, or if you're picking up a child, and that's a tier 1 system of support that ensures that all students are safe, right? Those are things that we don't naturally go to, and when we think of safety, we have security cameras that ensure we can monitor issues in the hallways and in our parking lots. That's again a tier 1 system and support, right? And we have security around our campuses. Again, tier 1 systems that impacts everybody. Now, when we do have issues in schools, there's a lot of safety issues that aren't necessarily violence, but are a variety of other concerns related to everything from fire setting to making sure that students are safe if they're showing suicidal ideation, or if there's a sexual incident in school that needs a response. We have very robust teams that attend to these, and these are our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, right? So we have the student threat assessment team that we call them STAT. We have Sexual Incident Response Committee, CIRC, the Suicide Prevention Protocol, that's SPP, our fire setting program, and our emergency crisis response team, and we call that and then we also have our EOC for whenever there's incidents in schools. All of these groups, we have, for each one of these resources, we have very skilled specialists internally who attend to these things. So some of you might have heard of something like a level 1 threat assessment. And a level 1 threat assessment is when there's been safety concerns that that has risen to a staff. And then there's a site team that determines what interventions need to be done to ensure that the school's safe and that the student's safe and that we have a safety plan moving forward. All of our level 1s are referred also to somebody internally to assess what the student threat assessment is, and they're reviewed by law enforcement. Level 2s also are when there's more intense levels of danger or safety concerns, and when those happen, we work with a multidisciplinary team, and we always work with our partners, and I'll show you an example of some of our partners, but we work with the police departments, Liberty House if it's an incident of child abuse, Salem-Keizer, and many more. So I want to emphasize that because I want to dispel any notion that we're working in a silo as a school district. It's a collective effort to keep our students safe and to keep our schools safe. And we're very thankful for the partnerships that we have, and we're very committed to partnering with our local agencies. So here's an example of the just a sheet of the local agencies that we have available. That we have partnerships with, and we often communicate with them when there's incidences. So here's an example of the frequency of our safety systems, right? So you'll see a 5-year progression, and you'll notice that maybe our level 1s and level 2s increase over the years. Sometimes they go up and sometimes they go down. When they increase, sometimes we get the notion of saying, well, our schools aren't safe if there's more incidents. But these are actually prevention systems. So if you're seeing these numbers rise, it's a correlation with prevention the same way that if you see a higher number of checkups at a school in a healthcare center for breast cancer or for heart risk, as people doing the right things to do prevention work. So this is really showing that our systems are robust, that they're being used, and that there's also more people that are knowledgeable about reporting something when they see a concern, and then we have a team that stands prepared to respond to our incidents. And so just wanted to kind of unpack what these numbers look like when you look at STAT, CIRC, and FIRE, right? And then one other thing that came up was the number of discipline incidents. And the data tells a story. And when you look at this, what you'll see is that suspensions have gone down significantly since 2019. But they're a little bit on the rise since last year, right? So that instead of us saying, well, schools just aren't safe, we ask a deeper question about why they're on a rise from last year. But we also are able to put into context why there's a lot less suspensions than 3 or 4 years ago. Same with our major discipline incidents. And I think what this shows a narrative of is that behaviors have changed and that maybe our tier 1 and tier 2s are starting to work, but we still have work to do when it comes to some of our major discipline incidents. Something we notice as well, if you direct your attention to the lower row where it says expulsions, is our expulsions have gone down significantly over the last few years. One of the primary reasons for that is because we're working with Bridgeways on alternatives to expulsion for a student who has a first or second drug offense, depending on the severity of the issue. And so that's, again, one strategy that we're using to attend to student needs and also mitigate students maybe being removed from school when school's a safe place, so long as we can make sure that they're getting the help that they need, right? So that's an example of, and also it's an example of maybe behaviors changing over the last 3 or 4 years with some of the serious incidents. So before I close, I want to end on this one thing that's really important for the board and the community to hear. Our safety risk and management systems have really taken on this task of making a department reflect the student population. And if you look at our safety, school safety specialists, our field coordinators, and directors and support staff, they are one of the most representative departments of diverse communities. And in doing so, they become cultural brokers in our schools, because when our safety and school safety specialists come into school and they have shared lived experiences and they are able to relate culturally to our students feel safe and they can open up to them. And that creates a lot of space for relationship building, a sense of belonging, and prevention. So I just want to give kudos to our safety risk management services team, because that's not an accident. It's very intentional, and we appreciate that about them.
Just one quick comment on two things. First of all, Salem's model was incorporated with Marion County as well as the school district, and John Vandrell was the leader of that. And not only has that been a model for the state of Oregon, but on a national level, it's been recognized. The second thing is that the process, have to understand it. I think they have to understand the process. Sometimes a student can go through a care team, and that student can't maybe get the immediate resources till he or she has reached a certain level, such as maybe the child has to be adjudicated before we can provide the resources that on the level that they might need. So these things, even though there is an immediate response that's occurring, it maybe isn't exactly what is needed until it develops further. But those care teams are attentive to what's happening.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the data here. Is the 2022, 2023 numbers, are those as of now, or are those projected for the end of the year?
Those are as of now. So all the numbers are as of, I believe I pulled them on Sunday night. So they're as of January 22nd. So I just typed in January, I believe, and pulled them up for all the comparison dates.
Director Chandragiri?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Odo-Sinata. Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Perry, I really appreciate the staff from our safety, security, and threat assessment team. I have extreme respect for them. There is no question about that. But throughout my 4 years, I have focused on safety of our student. It is not something just because I decided to put my name in the hat to run again for the elections. So I just want to go on the record to say I have consistently maintained safety even before I became a school board director. So I just want to make sure that's on the record. When I ask this question, it is not anything to do with the staff or anybody. It is with the true interest of making sure each and every child, every staff, every community member is safe. I do not want this to be at a personal level. It is all about how we can work on looking at the systems. So sometimes part of that is we have to raise this question. We need to shine light on them. And that's the only way we will regain trust and credibility. And the community is feeling scared. When they come to me, I have to reassure them. So we really need this kind of dialogue and a transparency so that the community feels assured that our systems are working. It is only with that intention I ask these questions. And I've consistently insisted and focused on advocating for our children's safety. Right from the first day I came, even before I started this role. So I just want to go on the record and make sure I clarify my position. It has nothing to do with my re-election. It is always to do with, I truly believe in our children should be safe. Without safety, there is no learning. And our teachers have to feel safe so that they can do their work. And that is how I really want to make sure I clarify, because there seems to be some misunderstanding or misinformation about when I advocate for safety. I've consistently maintained this. I have written about it publicly in op-eds and in different media. So it is not anything new that I'm sharing. So I really want to make sure I clarify that in public. I don't want anybody in this board or the community to be misinformed or or my position to be misrepresented. So please allow me, thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
Thank you for that, Director Chandragiri. I think that the problem, we as board members absolutely should be asking the tough questions.
Absolutely.
Like, I agree that we have to continuously raise these issues around safety and ask all of the questions. But when you make definitive statements in public that are stated as fact related to our district and the employees and students, that's where I think the harm occurs. So I would just request that we're careful about raising the issues and being passionate about the issues, but we refrain from saying things like, we don't have the ability to look at child abuse across the system, when we absolutely do have that ability.
Chair, I quoted from the letter that was sent by the Marion County DA. It's not my statement. I read from the letter that was sent by the District Attorney of Marion County. I highlighted and brought it for today's meeting. So I'm really quoting what has already been stated in the public record. And this particular letter, I can submit it again. It was presented in the board. It was shared in the board. So it's a matter of public record that I'm quoting.
Let me reframe and direct my question to the superintendent. Are we able to work across systems when there is a child abuse allegation?
Yes, yep.
Thank you. Okay, Director Avila.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm appalled by your statements as well, Director Chandragiri, and I think as you had stated that when the district put out the every day, all day to try to stop and help prevent students from being absent, you said that all these signs went out everywhere and you didn't even know if it worked. And that was very appalling to all the hard work that the district put into it, the communications, the marketing, and the efforts that they were doing. So, but on that, moving forward from that, I really appreciate all the work that you just shared as well, Dr. Nasunita, from the staff and really doing all these preventions. And that is the actual work that's getting done, putting systems in place that are addressing the behaviors and the issues. Again, SROs are not going to fix this issue of creating a safe environment when we're also creating a unsafe and welcoming environment for all students. We really need to address the causes. And there's evidence out there. Police having positive effects in our schools is inconclusive. But what is conclusive when SROs are in our schools, there's increased association with arrests and referrals to law enforcement. Students get tagged as a criminal, as a bad person, referred that to the outside law enforcement. They get picked up. So I've shared with you, Director Chandragiri, and as well with Director Hyen, multiple articles, reports with the school to prison pipeline. I hope you read it, hope you had a different intake and perspective and acknowledgement that it does exist. Just because you don't see those numbers directly from a Marion County report, it does not mean it does not exist. You did not listen to the students who shared their stories from these articles, from these reports. There's also, when police presence is associated with in schools, there's increased rates of exclusionary discipline or out-of-school suspension and expulsions. I think what you shared right now, Dr. Nosota, from the 2018 to this year, those rates are going down. However, they are up a little bit, but because we're coming out of a pandemic where social behaviors were dysregulated, and that we need to continue working on that. So I really appreciate all the work that's going on that. And lastly, I again just want to say that school-based arrests, exclusionary discipline, and their associated negative consequences are disproportionately affecting our students of color, our students with disabilities, our LGBTQ students. I have to say it time and time again for hopefully that this information will get ingrained and help in understanding and have empathy and compassion for our students, that we can address the situation from a different perspective and a different approach when working together. Lastly, Billions of public dollars have been invested in school safety, technology. Thousands of school police have been added, especially following the 2018 school shooting in Parkland, Florida. Yet, school shootings continue to occur, even in the hardened schools. And sadly, no school or no community can be safe when high-powered weaponry is illegal and available and brought onto campuses. We're not going to be able to stop it. And there's lots of research and evidence showing that SROs do not prevent or stop school mass shootings. So, through overwhelmingly analysis, the conclusion is that resources would be better spent increasing mental wellness supports and providing services that have been proven to improve school climate. The evidence, not assumptions or beliefs, should guide our school decision making. So thank you. Just want to share that.
Thank you, Director Avila. Second Vice Chair Guzman-Ortiz.
Thank you. I just wanted to say again, just how important collaboration for us all is, and that includes, collaboration between the community, the district, and the board. We do need to be able to communicate about the different needs, and I think we can all recognize that our systems aren't perfect, that no system is perfect, and that is part of the work, right? That we can continue to communicate and collaborate on that. Vilifying, a system or a person, a human, doesn't help anyone. So I guess my ask just for all of us here today would be that we continue the ongoing conversations, the revisions, and the refinement of the systems and our policies. I do believe that the collaboration will carry us forward for the health, the safety, and the well-being of our children, our families, educators, and our whole community. And that's what we're here for. So thank you.
Thank you. I had one more question before we, I think, are getting close to wrapping up, but kind of along the lines of what you just raised, Director Guzman-Ortiz. I'm curious about the gaps. We know no system is perfect, and so I guess I'll throw it open. I think we are doing a lot of the right things, really focusing some of our resources in the right areas. I'm very happy that we have these strong relationships that are focused on a comprehensive assessment of a situation to really dive in and prevent tragedies and to keep people safe. And so what are our current gaps in your estimation, Superintendent or Assistant Superintendent?
Yeah, so let me start, and then I'll see if anyone from my team has anything to add. But so a couple things. One is the highly dysregulated students, sometimes students with disabilities, that absolutely struggle to maintain regulation in our classrooms. And these are kids who need much more mental health intervention than a public school. And these are also kids that we would never, even if they hurt a kid when a student with student with disabilities, we remove them. But these aren't arrests because these aren't intentional. These are kids who don't know how to regulate. So, but at the same time, we don't have great community-based mental health placements. So for kids who are really tier 4, we don't have that. And in some ways, that's not a public school's job by itself. So I would say the biggest gaps are community gaps in mental health services, community gaps in cultural brokers for students who are beginning to be involved in gangs. Our best prevention involves going into the community and navigating culture and elders and getting families. Well, that can't just all be on us. So I guess the biggest thing is some sort of a comprehensive children's initiative within our community are our bigger gaps. Now, gaps in the tier 1, tier 2, we see those every day anytime we have a gap and try to course correct. And we kind of have the resources. But now remember, we're spending about $38 million on mental health supports when you count counselors, behavior specialists, and that's not enough for those tier 4. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the biggest gaps. And that's really a community issue we need to solve. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, the only gap that I see in addition to that is we know it's inevitable that we have some students that are going to fall through the cracks, and so continuing to look at whether it's through empathy interviews or through knowing every student by their story, understanding what's happening with students that are on a wait list to go to alt programming, what's happening to students who are perhaps 10-day dropped, and how can we refine our programming to make sure that we're enhancing the sense of belonging for students, because I think that's one of the gaps that we still need to improve in.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, one of the conversations I was having today with a school leader was around especially our secondary kids need some smaller school environments. Kids who aren't interested in athletics, clubs, music, theater, just need a small space, a smaller learning environment to come to school. So we've got to really think about that as well.
Thank you.
I had a kind of quick question.
Go ahead.
I guess just thinking about the family caregiver involvement in this system, like, does it fall anywhere? Is that an opportunity? And I know that it came up during the integrated planning conversation of just kind of a desire for increased parent engagement. So curious where that might land on this work.
You actually reminded me of one thing that we're working on. We're trying to pilot in schools is our parent volunteer program. And we're recruiting parents at a few of our high schools and a few of our middle schools. And the goal is just to get them in the hallways when students are arriving to schools, to be an extra sense of presence, community, another trusted adult. And so that's one thing that we're trying to do in terms of just active parent engagement. But we are always looking for ways to enhance authentic parent engagement, community engagement, whether it's standing up a parent committee at Houck or Waldo and asking them what their needs are, or frequently engaging with families throughout the school year so that we understand what the needs are and what's going on in the community.
Okay. Well, I'll just try to wrap us up. Thank you for all of the information. I guess my takeaways are that our safety systems are strong and intact. We have gaps that we need to close that are sometimes larger systems issues than just our school, but it also is incumbent upon us to work within those larger systems. And so, feel free to put us to work doing some of that. I think our threat assessment system really starts with the district and what we're doing, not with law enforcement. And that, our threat assessment system, as Director Salazar mentioned, really is the gold standard, not just locally, but nationally. And that safety really has to go beyond law enforcement, but we're very grateful to our local law enforcement for the relationships that we've been able to build and their work within the threat assessment network. I think this is the thing that probably keeps us all up at night as school board directors. And so I know we all want to hear more. We want to be able to roll up our sleeves and help where appropriate and when we can. And just so much gratitude to the district for thinking through all of these issues with us and educating us, and for your continuous improvement in this area. Thank you. With that takes us to the end of our agenda. And so I will note the time. It's 9:01 and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.